Welcome to our presentation about the appeal of the rogue expert archetype in science-skeptical narratives.
So this presentation is about a story type that we have noticed when I was working on my master's thesis supervised by Alexandra. And this study was about Hebrew-speaking Facebook groups and the vaccine-related discourse in them, one pro-vaccine group, one vaccine skeptic group. And quite at an early stage, we have noticed two facts that each of these facts is not wholly surprising in and of itself, but there is some tension between them. So the first thing we have noticed is that science skeptic communities usually downplay the importance of formal education and formal credentials, which makes sense, of course, because most scientists, most of the people with these credentials, tend to be pro-science. And then the other one is that when these scientists are not opposing these communities' views, then the opposite happens, and they actually stress and emphasize these formal credentials and scientific argumentation. Yeah, and one sort of context in which this happens is what we call the rogue scientist script or story type. And this is the script in its ideal form, if you will. We have a scientist with a high level of expertise and formal credentials, a very good scientist, young and brilliant, respected, and so on. And the scientist detects some harmful flaws, some terrible discovery about scientific practices or knowledge. They, of course, try to go through the appropriate channels, but the system is unwilling to admit these flaws, and often they try to silence them, usually due to financial or power interests. However, our scientist is very benevolent, so they are trying to make this finding public out of concern to the public or obligation to the truth. And unfortunately, they pay for it. This is how the story usually ends. And we have a prototypical example here from the vaccine skeptic group we were working on. And this is Dr. Judy Mikovits and the cancer virus. You can see in blue, we have the emphasis on her credentials or her expertise. So Dr. Judy Mikovits, biochemistry, biology, scientist, researcher, etc., etc. We have later one of the most important journals in the United States that she published in, and so forth. In purple, we have her amazing discovery, astonishing discovery that cancer is caused by a virus that is injected to people in vaccines and so on. Then in orange-ish, we have the system that is trying to silence her, and the establishment that is hastening to deny the existence of the cancer virus, and the media also, and so on. In green, you have the emphasis on her good intentions. Dr. Judy Mikovits' good intentions, whose passion was to heal and help people. And then in red, you have the price that she had to pay, in this case, sexual imprisonment. Usually it's not that terrible. Now, this is the cancer virus, but we also have similar stories in different contexts, and we don't have time to go over all of them, but you can see the same color coding if you want to follow it later. You have one from climate models, and we have about COVID vaccines again, we have medication in general, we have epigenetics, we have genetically modified crops, and we have herbicides here. And I actually rather like this particular example because you can see in this one image that was shared on Twitter, you can see all 5 elements of this story type, from the UC Berkeley professor in blue, then in purple the discovery about atrazine, in orange you have the establishment trying to buy this scientist and silence him. In green you have the benevolent intentions, upholding scientific and academic integrity, and in red the price.
Then we asked ourselves why this script was so compelling, and we turned to narratology in order to find out. And the first concept from narratology we use is the archetype, a concept going back to Carl Gustav Jung, which covers over eternal characters that are recognizable and manifest themselves in all times and places, in art, literature, and stories in general. And they are, as I said, recognizable with no need of explanation. That's why they work very fast also. And we have actually a martyr archetype. And the definition of this martyr archetype is that they give all they have in sacrifice to the needs of those around them, whatever the pain or cost to themselves. And we all know the historical martyrs like Joan of Arc, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, or hear from the biblical story of St. Andrew. The next concept from narratology is the theme. Themes are central ideas in a story which can become conventionalized by repetition and are also easily recognizable by that. And a very, very often used theme is an individual's values against the values of society or their community, like we have it in the Prometheus story or Nora Helmer in Doll's House, or Winston Smith in 1984. And here we want to point out that the rogue expert that actually is also acting inside this theme is very close to the whistleblower, who also stands up against their former community, but it depends actually on whose side you are on in order to see who you will call a rogue expert and who you will call a whistleblower.
Yeah, so now we appreciate why this story is so compelling, but this is only halfway to understanding why it is so prevalent in so many different contexts, in so many different science skeptic contexts, if you will, and the other half is about epistemic trust. Now, we know already that trust involves risk, right? And this is why we have epistemic vigilance. When we need to trust someone, we don't just automatically trust anyone. We have cognitive mechanisms against being misinformed in this case, against putting our trust in someone that is unworthy of it. It would be too dangerous. And we are using the epistemic trust model proposed by Hendricks and colleagues. And this model has basically three pillars that we rely on when we decide whom we may trust, whom to put our trust in. The first one is expertise. So if we are to trust someone, we want to know that they are they're knowledgeable, that they know what they're talking about in this relevant context. The other one is integrity. So this means that they act according to a set of rules or principles that are acceptable to us as the truster. They have established knowledge generation or belief forming procedure. And the last one is benevolence. So this means if we are to trust someone, we want to know that they have our best interest or society's best interest in mind, that what they're saying is not said only to promote their own interest. Now, what we argue is that the rogue expert story type or narrative actually ticks all the boxes in this epistemic trust model. So expertise, you will remember in the blue, they emphasize this formal education, the formal credentials. Integrity, again, we have prioritizing the search for the truth. And benevolence, you will remember in the green, working for the benefit of society. And you may also recall the martyr archetype. Again, what we think of, what we associate with martyrdom, we associate strong moral compass. Again, this stresses their integrity. We also think of unselfishness and sacrifice, again, emphasizing their benevolence. Now, benevolence is particularly important because when we, as lay people, think which scientist we can believe in case where there is disagreement within the scientific community. Obviously, we cannot rely on expertise, for example, because we cannot judge as lay people, or maybe both sides have similar expertise. We rely particularly on benevolence to decide which side to believe. And martyrdom is, of course, an ultimate proof of benevolence. Finally, we can also mention that the fact that a member of the opposing team, so the scientific community, actually acts against what you might expect just from being a scientist, and supports the views of a scientific skeptic community, this also highlights their integrity, because you wouldn't expect them to do that. They probably have a good reason. Now, finally, we have been fortunate enough to find this idea being expressed explicitly in Natural News. If you don't know Natural News, it's enough to say that this is a website from which many of the quotes in this presentation have been taken. And again, we have the author comparing two groups of scientists, and they say, not being a physician, I cannot decide on the scientific merits of the issue. What do? Well, they turn to benevolence and they turn to martyrdom as the ultimate proof of benevolence and of integrity and of trustworthiness. The frontline doctors have risked everything. Between the two groups, I believe the independent physicians who are risking everything who are martyrs, not the political physicians who are desperately fearful of losing what they have.
So what are our take-home messages? Firstly, the appeal of the martyr script highlights once again the important status of perceived benevolence, and might hereby be informative to general theories of trust in scientists and to any measures aimed at heightening the public's trust in science. Second, storytelling could actually be a way of increasing the appeal of conventional scientists, especially when using stories that highlight their benevolence or even decrease the benevolence of rogue scientists by highlighting the profit they make. And actually on our slides about Mikowitz and Lipton, you can see that they make enormous profits by selling books and so on, and have obviously own interests in mind. And lastly, there is a fine line between a whistleblower and a rogue scientist, and it depends on which side you are on, which label you would use about a person. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.